Hey guys, welcome into another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. This is business as usual. We had a lot of fun doing some live streams this week. Hopefully you enjoyed those, but we're back to the normal routine of the Monday, Thursday shows. So I got a fun one planned for you guys today. Obviously talking about the recent free agency moves such as Jared Cook and Ode Abushi. I'm assuming that's how you say it until I see or otherwise. And then we'll talk about some draft implications from free agency as well. First and foremost, Alex and Tyler are here with me today. Alex, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. It feels a little bit better to be doing the normal show and I don't have to read, all the comments coming across at the same time. We'll do live streams because they're fun and I'm sure we'll do draft stuff, but it's a nice little breather.
It is a nice little breather, man, and definitely a lot of fun to do those. And we thank you guys for tuning in and supporting the show that way. Tyler, how are you doing today?
Live comments or no comments, I will still forget what I'm saying mid-sentence.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, it was classic fashion where I proclaimed that I had no interest in a certain player, and then that certain player signs with the Chargers the next day in Jared Cook. I've come around. I'm not really, saying that it's a bad signing or a good signing. I just think it's a good value signing. And it's a good stopgap option for Hunter Henry. So things moved really quick that day. Went from the Chargers were reportedly trading for Zach Ertz, or at least in the conversation. Michael Silver said that they were in on Kyle Rudolph as well. And then ultimately they signed Jared Cook. So Tyler, what was your initial reaction? And, now that we've had a few days to sit on it, what do you think of the Chargers signing Jared Cook?
It's a great way to phrase the question because at first I'm like, come on. Especially because 30 minutes before it's like, oh, they're interested in Ertz. Again, the second report, like, okay, here we go. And then they sign Cook. It's like, oh, okay. And it's, based on what the other teams did, like the Bills, it seems like the Eagles were asking for way too much, whether that be the fourth or third, whatever they were asking for. The Chargers weren't budging, and that's fine. Now that the dust has settled, I get it. The Chargers were not efficient in the red zone. I think they were 20th. The Saints were 5th. A large part of that is because of Jared Cook, in between the 20s. Every single one of his touchdowns last year was between the 20 and the goal line. Do you guys know which one was the one that was longer than 20 yards?
It was the one against the Chargers.
Yeah. Lovely. So great. It worked for Herbert last season with Parham a couple of times, or at least one time, fire to the left against the Bucks. Easy jump ball, get the layup, whatever. The only thing I'm concerned with is that the team is still pretty slow. Keenan Allen, while not, incredibly fast or slow, he's not all that fast. Mike Williams, Jalen Guyton's your speed, but he can't catch. And, Jared Cook is not fast. And so you're relying on Tyron Johnson, I guess, as your best burner. And I just think the offense overall is just kind of slow right now. So a lot of big body targets, a lot of good red zone stuff. And, maybe Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen can get you from 20 to 20, and then you turn to your bigger guys in the end zone or whatever. But I just think the offense is pretty slow. So that's the only thing I'm concerned about right now. And also, I just want to see what they do next. Where does the Chargers plan after this? They got rid of all their offensive linemen, which is great. But what was your plan? Of course, their plan was Filer, Lindsley, Abuji, and who knows going into the draft. So that's great. So if Cook is your only option for the entire season and Parham, I'm really concerned. But, they've met with a tight end. We know they'll probably take a tight end in the first 5 picks at least. So if they do that, I'll feel much more comfortable. But for right now, it's a good signing, but I do want to see just a little bit more because I am concerned a little bit.
Yeah, my initial reaction was disappointment because I was all in on the Ertz train.
Right.
But, the more I thought about it, it was like, well, is Ertz going to be around, right? And if Ertz has a career year, can you really afford to pay him in 2022? Because you're thinking about maybe a Mike Williams extension. If Derwin James stays healthy, maybe a Derwin extension, right? So there's a lot of things that they had to fill out. And Zach Ertz, I think it was less the picks, honestly, and just the fact that Ertz wouldn't commit to signing a contract extension. And then in that case, if we're just comparing stopgap options, Jared Cook is someone that you can bring in for 1 year. You can bring him back the next year if you need to. But Ertz isn't that kind of guy with the, sort of money he's going to make or figures to make. And Kyle Rudolph was a little bit sort of the same thing, obviously not as big as Ertz, but, he did sign a 2-year deal with the Giants. So that's sort of, you are sacrificing more cap room over, 2-year stretch as opposed to a 1 year with Cook. I was a little bit disappointed at first, like Tyler said, in terms of, Jared Cook isn't necessarily like an athlete or anything, but I mean, at the same time, Hunter Henry wasn't necessarily super athletic either, and I
Yeah.
kind of think Cook has more upside in the red zone. I don't think his production is quite going to match what Hunter Henry was able to put up, which is, he probably, had he not missed the last 2 games with COVID, probably would have wound up with 700 yards. I don't think that Jared Cook's going to do that, but he did have 500 yards this year, and I think 7 touchdowns, even though his production, his number of snaps declined towards the end of the year because they wanted to play Troutman. But I think it's a fine replacement for a year. You figure out where you are next year. The biggest upside to it is the long-term flexibility, right? You can take a Tommy Tremble, you can take a tight end, you can do whatever you want, and that really helps, right? In terms of the long-term development of the position, you can see what you have in Parham if you like that. And I think that's probably the biggest upside to it. And then obviously the second biggest upside is you have Frank Smith and you have Joe Lombardi, and both of those coaches were linked to 2 of Jared Cook's Pro Bowl seasons at age 31 and 32. So he's not that much older now. It's just been a year since his last Pro Bowl season. So I think it's a decent signing for 1 year. Gives you flexibility. You can see where you go from here. And I mean, he can play, I think, at a relatively high level. And now Justin Herbert is his quarterback instead of, a sort of declining Breeze.
Well, Breeze and Taysom Hill, like he had 4 or 5 games with Taysom Hill. So, like I understand why they did it, right? It made sense on paper. Like Alex was just saying, they had the coaching connections, 2 of them to boot. And so if anybody knows how to get the most out of Jared Cook, it's these 2 guys, Frank Smith and Joe Lombardi. So that makes sense. Like Tyler was saying, the red zone options, it makes sense to me, right? Because now you have 6'8" Donald Parham, you have 6'5" Jared Cook, and you have 6'4" Mike Williams. And you have a quarterback with a really strong arm and who is coming off a great season. So I get that kind of thing. I'm just a little concerned because, people were like, well, Jared Cook is a decent blocker. He's not. Jared Cook is not a good blocker. Most of his snaps come out of the slot. And when his teams have needed a good blocker, they go to other tight ends. Obviously, New Orleans had Josh Hill, and Oakland / Las Vegas had Foster Moreau and other guys to kind of take on that kind of duty. And so it just doesn't make sense to me from that kind of standpoint. And if they're really going to bring in a lot of Kyle Shanahan influence, they're going to need to add a truly, truly legitimate blocking tight end, because if you look at what Green Bay has done, their rushing efficiency without Mercedes Lewis at tight end went way down. And if you look at San Francisco, yeah, they have George Kittle, who's an amazing receiving tight end, but he's also the best blocking tight end in the league. And so, you look at all these places, all these Shanahan offenses around the league, they need a really good blocking tight end, and they don't have that. They have Jared Cook and they have Donald Parham. I think Tommy Tremble is probably the best blocker in the draft, but that's going to be an adjustment for him, blocking ACC teams instead of blocking NFL teams. So I don't know. That's my one concern here, is the blocking aspect of things, because if they're really going to do a lot of Kyle Shanahan thing, which Corey Linsley said, it's going to be an easy transition for him from the Shanahan system that Green Bay is running to what they're going to be running in LA. They're going to need a better blocking presence. And the other thing too is, like, Gabe Neighbors isn't a good blocker either. So, what are they going to do in blocking, right? Not taking a shot at Gabe Neighbors, because we've kind of done that a lot, but he's not a great blocker. That's just the reality of the situation. So whether that's bringing in Mercedes Lewis or bringing back Virgil Green or something, they're going to have to upgrade the blocking department in the tight end room.
Yeah, I mean, Jared Cook just straight up isn't a blocking tight end.
I
don't even think
he doesn't even do it.
It's like it's a he's good or he's bad thing. Like, he had 3 blocking snaps last year if you look at his Pro Football Focus. So like there's he doesn't do it. Yeah. And maybe they can find a way to position him in that role, but I think the better bet, based on the Jared Cook route that they've taken, is probably to take a tight end within those first 4 picks, which I think is much more likely now, and see what you can get out of Parham, right? If Parham develops into a better blocking tight end, maybe you have something there. honestly, you mentioned Mercedes Lewis, and he is a free agent. I mean, he's 37. I don't know if Green Bay is going to want him back. We'll see. But I wouldn't mind giving him a 1-year deal as kind of a blocker and sort of like a Virgil Green type role, if he would be willing to take that. But yeah, they definitely need a blocking presence for sure.
They could just put Virgil Green in a Virgil Green role.
Yeah, I mean, that works too.
I thought the team wanted to get younger, but they just went with Cook. So why not
Mhm.
Green? Like, I don't see a reason why you can't, unless his injury is you can't come back from it.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that they're setting themselves up. So based on, if you were betting, you'd probably think left tackle at 13, a corner in the second round,
Yeah.
and, edge and receiver, interior lineman in the third round or whatever. Now you may have to take your Brevin Jordan in the second, or you have to take Tommy Tremble, probably with that first third round pick. If you really want him, you could wait. It's really nice in the Draft Network mock drafts to wait until the fourth round to take him, but it's just not going to work like that.
Right.
They want their guy. And I don't know how many really good blocking tight ends there are in this draft. So I'm worried that they're going to set themselves up to go tackle, go corner, and then have to get Tommy Tremble. And now you're taking edge with your back third round pick, or you switch it up, take an edge, and now you have a corner with your second, third round pick. Like, I'm getting a little bit worried there. So I'd like to see a position addressed, or just bring back Virgil Green. Or maybe they like Darnell Parham as a blocker. I thought he got better.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the route that they're
true.
going. Maybe they think he's a legitimately good blocker. Fine. Good luck.
I mean, if he is that, then that obviously would give them a lot of flexibility, because then they don't have to take a Tremble or a Brevin Jordan or Kenny Yeboah early. They can kind of wait and take another developmental guy. But the good news is that Jared Cook, with him, Donald Parham is not exclusively the tight end one. Like, he is the stopgap option. Like Alex said, it gives them flexibility, and they just have to improve in the blocking department, and they should be fine. In terms of we'll talk about like long-term, ramifications, but the next signing that the Chargers made over the weekend was Ode Abuji. And, at first I was like, okay, like he was a backup for most of his career, really only started for one season. And then Brandon Thorne was like, no, this guy's legit. And then Duke Manyweather was like, no, this guy's legit. And so it was a wild ride of like, oh, maybe this is just like a Cole Toner replacement, to like, no, this guy is going to be a legitimate starter for them. Just a wild turn of events, super cheap, super affordable deal. Tyler, you did that breakdown on him, which if you haven't checked it out, make sure you go check it out on our YouTube channel. What was your biggest takeaway from watching him on film? I think you only did the one game, right?
Yeah, I just did the one game against Washington. I was trying to find a team that had some sort of decent defensive front, right? And I was genuinely surprised that this guy, no one really knew who this guy was. I know Daniel Popper put him in his article. Of course, someone called him out because he put like every free agent lineman in his article. That quite doesn't count.
I think he had like 41 linemen in there, man. Like, great.
Yeah.
But come
on. I was just impressed with the fact, if I was grading him, and just purely off that game, and he was a draft pick, a potential draft pick, I legitimately might have given him a first round grade. He did a little bit of everything I would have liked to see, whether it was pulling, whether it was taking on different responsibilities, picking up the blitzes and whatnot. And to have a veteran like that at such a cheap price, sandwiched in between Balaga and Lindsley, I'm sure I haven't watched Balaga's tape in a long time, but you just put out a thing on Lindsley and you see how great he is with communication, understanding everything. And now you have someone like Abouji who, at least off of one game, looks like he understands everything the defense is trying to do him, or at least understands his responsibility and can execute. So not only is this line, I think, just more talented overall, they're just smarter. They just seem like the Chargers are also putting together a smart offensive line. And they didn't have that last year, and they suffered for it. And if you wanted to get into the stats, go for it. It's nasty.
It is rather nasty,
right,
man.
Speaking of
go ahead, Alex. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, speaking of stats, like, my first inclination when he was signed was to be like, all right, what was his PFF score last year? Like many people. And you look at it, it's like, oh, he had a 66.2. And then you realize, oh, wait, offensive linemen are supposed to grade in the 60s, which we're not familiar with Chargers players. And then, Tyler posted a good film breakdown on YouTube, and it's like, okay, this guy has something to him. I don't know if he's going to be the starter, right? That depends on what they do in the draft, if they take a Wyatt Davis or, whatever they do. But, I think he has the potential to start, and he's basically Cole Toner, but better, right? And he has 41 starts under his belt. He's been around the league. One pressure allowed on 622 snaps, or sorry, one sack allowed on 622 snaps, 11 pressures. That's really good. We'll have to see kind of how it all plays out, but I don't know if they're going to sign another guard or if they're going to just go forward with the Aboushi. But I have a lot of confidence in him to just kind of nail it, right? And the other thing, we mentioned that he's going to be sandwiched in between Corey Linsley and Ryan Balaga, and that's probably a lot better than what great situation. It's probably a lot better than what he had in Detroit or Seattle, right? And these other stops he's made in the NFL. So, his contract, you're getting $1.75 million for 1 year. That's a great contract for the Chargers. Not so much for Aboushi, because if you're playing in California on $1.75 million, that means you really get like $200K total. But, it's a good deal for the Chargers. I think they'll get the most out of it, whether it's him as a backup or him, they just need a decent offensive lineman. And the other thing I like about the signing is just like, it's clear that they're going full nuclear option, right? Yeah. Other than Pipkins and Norton and some of the other guys that are still on the roster, they're throwing out Tevy we'll see with Tevy, but Feeney and Lamp are gone, and we'll see kind of what happens. But I just like that they have this attitude with the offensive line. We're going to go out and get the guys we want, and we're going to just fix it, right? That's what we've been asking them to do. Daniel Popper was of the mindset, and I was of the mindset that, maybe they'll bring back two of the three, just as depth pieces, but new coaching staff, new offensive line. I really like that just in general.
Yeah. It was really smart of them. Like, this is what happens with new coaching staffs, right? Like, you come in and you go nuclear, and it just happened that the offensive line needed to be blown up. And so now you have, again, it's very similar to Jared Cook. You have flexibility. If you want to draft a Wyatt Davis in the second round, you can still do that. If you want to take, Quinn Miners in the second round and have him challenge in the second round for the starting position at right guard, you can still do that. So it gives them flexibility, gives them options. If he is the starter, great. And so Tyler mentioned the numbers. Here they are, right? Like, the three interior offensive linemen, like in terms of the starters, I'm not counting Cole Toner or Tyree St. Lee or anything like that. You have Forrest Lamp, Dan Feeney, and Trey Turner. They played a combined 41 games between the three of them, and they allowed a whopping 90 total pressures between the three of them. The new trio of Matt Filer, Corey Linsley, and Ode Aboushi played a combined 40 games and allowed just 35 pressures. So less than half, right? Like, this is so much better. Like, this group is going to be so much better. And it's just different styles, right? Like Matt Filer, he mentioned it. He's like, I want to blow people off the ball. I want to finish blocks. I want to be physical. And Ode Aboushi is the same way. And Corey Linsley, that's not really his game, but he'll get to the second level. He'll make a lot of impact blocks that way. And he's not going to, push people 5 yards behind the ball, but he's not going to get blown up either, like Dan Feeney would all the freaking time. So it's going to be huge for, the running backs and for Justin Herbert and for everybody involved. Like, the offensive line is trending in the right direction. And like I said, if they want to draft a Wyatt Davis and have him challenge, Ode for the starting spot, they can still do that, and Ode, if he is the backup, if he is the swing interior offensive lineman, that's great. The Chargers haven't had a great swing option in, I don't think they ever have in my entire life watching this team. So, Ode Aboushi, if he's the backup, that's a great spot for him. It's a great spot for the Chargers. And if he's the starter, same kind of thing, because, he's a reliable, serviceable, above average interior offensive lineman. And that's what the Chargers needed.
Right. And I think the big thing for me is just like, you're kind of doing the nuclear option, like we've said. And this guy is a serviceable piece, and you can do whatever you want with him. The fact that you have Filer, Linsley, and now Aboushi just kind of in there, I think is such a strength for the Chargers. I don't know what they'll do at the tackle spots. That remains to be seen. But just having Corey Linsley in general, communicating to the rest of the offensive line, and now you have these, other interior linemen right next to him that are better than what they had before. Like, I just don't think that can be overstated. Obviously, the tackle spots will be incredibly important when you're going against the type of edge talent there is in the AFC. But, just from a interior standpoint, like, this is the best Chargers group of the last 15 years. Like, I don't think it's a stretch to say that.
Yeah, and it's okay to be apprehensive about the group. The Chargers did, in theory, get 2 upgrades last season, and it didn't quite pan out. But one of the things I want to keep an eye on with this group and with that 13th pick is what are the Chargers going to do? And I think so far, the Chargers have only signed guys who have graded fairly well on Pro Football Focus, and also the numbers add up, right? They match, right? They match the grade. It's not like Alejandro Villanueva, where he gave up 43 pressures. It has like a 70 something, which doesn't make any sense to me, but whatever. That's Pro Football Focus. But you have to start thinking that they are taking these advanced metrics pretty seriously. And the 3rd ranked tackle on Pro Football Focus's board is Christian Darasaw, who they gave a 94.5 run block grade, a 90.8 pass block grade. He allowed 0 sacks, 0 hits, and he fits the mold of an offensive lineman physically for the Chargers. So I do think that is worth keeping in mind as we move forward.
The other thing I really like is just versatility, right? You talk about they haven't told Filer if he's playing right or left guard. I actually think that's really cool. And I think the other thing with Aboushi, he played, I believe, 60 snaps at left guard last year and 3 snaps at right tackle, right? So the fact that, again, you can swing him around wherever you want. And they may, decide to switch it up in some games, or depending on what the matchups are. So I think that's just a really good benefit for them.
Yeah, that added versatility, especially for Filer, like, we've talked about, Brian Bulaga is probably going to miss a couple games. And I would much rather at this point put Matt Filer at right tackle and then figure out whoever is the guard in his place than watch Trey Pipkins again or Storm Norton. So, it gives them options. In terms of the tackles, a lot of people have asked me about Eric Fisher, Alejandro Villanueva. The people on the market in terms of offensive tackles, it's just not really, I'm not interested in them, right? Because Tyler just mentioned Villanueva. I've never really felt like he is an above average lineman. Like, he's probably better than Sam Tevi, but like, how much and at what cost, right? If my choices are going to be Alejandro Villanueva at $13 million per year, 14 or 15, or Sam Tevi at 4 or 5, like, I'm probably going to take Sam Tevi, or ideally take a rookie at 13. Like, that's the cheapest and best option, in my opinion, at left tackle. I would still like to see them, add another, swing tackle maybe to bring some competition at least, because, again, Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins should not be counted upon at this point. They haven't really proven anything. They shouldn't be mainstays. They shouldn't be just, assumed roster spots, right? And so if they add a Ricky Wagner, or I want to say it's Dennis Kelly, who was released by the Titans, as like a backup tackle, I think that would make a lot of sense. Or you could bring back Sam Tevi. And again, we haven't really heard anything about Sam Tevi's market or if he's coming back or anything. So that's just something to keep an eye upon. In case anyone has forgotten, Eric Fisher tore his Achilles in December. Stop asking me about Eric Fisher. Please, for the love of God, stop asking me about Eric Fisher. He's not going to bounce back from this. At best, you're getting, again, barely better than Sam Tevi. So, no.
Yeah, the Villanueva thing is interesting, just because I just have a feeling that somehow he might end up on the Chargers. Because we're going into week 2. There hasn't been any reported interest in him, so I feel like his market is sliding, though I don't know if that's just that his agent is keeping things under wraps or whatever. But a lot of people were like, oh, Trent Williams got signed, so the next guy is Villanueva. And he hasn't gotten really any interest. There hasn't been one Rappaport tweet that was sent to him by his agent or whatever. Like, and the fact that that's a thing, it just makes me think, okay, so instead of getting, whatever we expected for him in like a 3-year, $42 million deal, right? Is he going to get into the point where he's like, all right, I'll take 1 year, 10 million or something like that. I don't know if he'll take like a bet on himself kind of deal. I'm not really interested in him because, as we mentioned, like, I think it's a Trey Turner kind of situation where it's like, He is good on Pro Football Focus, and I think he had probably a good year last year, but he's kind of been going in the wrong direction, and he might just hit that wall, right? And like we saw Trey Turner, unfortunately, last year. I guess if you have him on a 1-year deal, it's not a terrible bet. But if I was negotiating with Villanueva for any reason, I probably would not go after it. And just in general, we've seen that the signings so far of Lindsley, Filer, and Aboushi have all been kind of analytically inclined, like you guys mentioned, and it just feels like Villanueva would kind of be the other way, which is like it sort of falls in line with the moves the Chargers made last year. And like, okay, we'll go get Brian Bulaga and we'll go get Trey Turner, right? We'll go get the expensive linemen instead of kind of winning in the margins a little bit. So I'll be curious to see. I kind of have him as a prediction, maybe Villanueva, but I would also be a pass on that personally.
I'll just add that I don't think it's going to happen, but I've been wrong 47 times through free agency so far. So
Yeah.
I keep changing my name. And
yeah, really, like outside of Lindsley, like, you know, it's been a little tough to predict what they're doing. I think a lot of people probably pegged Jared Cook as a Hunter Henry replacement, but you know, really the surprise of the free agency period so far for the Chargers is that they haven't added any defensive players. You know, they obviously re-signed Michael Davis, which I thought was a great deal. Definitely got him at a value cost and a great deal for him as well. But you know, I hate to be like that guy, but it's like, oh, Kyle Fuller, like, and they were in on Kyle Fuller, right? It's just, you know, it happened to work out that he, you know, had a deal worked out beforehand with the Denver Broncos. And so unfortunately the Chargers will be playing him twice a year now instead of having him. And Adoree Jackson looks like he's going to be a New York Giant sooner rather than later. You know, he's meeting with them. He's meeting with all the players and things like that. That would be a great signing. But, you know, this defense, like, you have Derwin James, you have Joey Bosa, you have Kenneth Murray, Chris Harris, and that's the starters, right? You have Linval Joseph, obviously. So like their secondary needs a lot of work, and I think this really kind of points to them potentially taking a corner at 13, and for sure adding probably 3 secondary pieces in the draft, because they need to be remade. They haven't really signed anyone. They could still obviously sign a couple of veterans, but I mean, right now it looks like they're going to take probably 2 secondary pieces in the first, you know, 5 picks, if I had to assume. And, you know, it's a high probability and possibility that they take a cornerback at 13, in my opinion, unless they sign, you know, somebody, you know, relatively soon.
Yeah, you know, we've talked about it, or we're going to talk about it soon with Denver and the Giants and the signings they made this week to change the draft. But Kyle Fuller is the kind of move where it's like, all right, if we have him and we have Michael Davis, then we might be able to wait on a corner, right? But, you know, that didn't pan out. Doesn't look like Adoree Jackson's going to pan out. And doesn't seem like the Chargers have a lot of interest in him. But yeah, I think that the corner, you know, on this team is thin in terms of depth. You know, you have Michael Davis as your CB1, which I'm fine with, but then you're really having Chris Harris as your CB2, and then which is okay, but then you have Tavon Campbell in the slot,
face
right?
on, man.
Right, or Brandon Faison, right? And that takes, you know, really the issue with that is it takes Chris Harris away from what he does best, which is the slot. So that's where you want to have Chris Harris, as opposed to, you know, putting him at CB2, which is what Fangio did in his last year in Denver. So I think they should, you know, I think they have to get a cornerback in the draft, in free agency, someone to at least put kind of a buffer between, you know, Brandon Faison and, you know, Tavon Campbell in starting slot roles, but and, you know, keep Chris Harris at safety, not at safety, at a cornerback, at slot.
Okay. Let you get through that one, Alex.
Thanks.
It seems like they know that they need help at corner if they were actually in at Fuller, which means they are looking at some sort of legit starting option for the team. And so I think that will get addressed in free agency still. Starting option. I don't know if it's going to be a starter, but it'll be someone that they can peg as at least a stopgap, perhaps. I don't know.
Right.
But they are setting themselves up to look at the corners from any point in the draft. Denver has now allowed probably a corner to slip to 13, one of the big 3. They have looked at Asante Samuel, who could probably go in the second round. They have looked at Trill Williams, who can go in the third, fourth, whatever round. They looked at Avery Williams, who could go back end of the draft. So I think they are ready to. I think they're going to sign someone in free agency, and then I think they are ready to let the draft kind of tell them where they're going to take their next corner. I'm still worried, like we talked about, having to take Tommy Tremble and Brevin Jordan now. That kind of eliminates the possibility of taking a better corner. But we'll see. For right now, I think they're just.
Yeah.
I think they're going to add someone in free agency still.
Yeah, we have to take the wait and see mantra right now, right? Because everybody's kind of like, well, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything. Well, the Brandon Staley and Vic Fangio scheme requires like 6 above average defensive backs. Like, they're not going to head into the season with Derwin James, Chris Harris, and Michael Davis being the only above average defensive backs. Like, they will do something. And so, they have a couple options. Steven Nelson from Pittsburgh has been rumored to be, available for trade, which means he's probably going to be released in the next few days. And they could still call Adoree Jackson. I don't think it's going to happen, but they could call Adoree Jackson's former teammate in Malcolm Butler. And I know a lot of people kind of have this, narrative in their minds that he's kind of washed up, but he had a really good season last year. He was 10th in passer rating when targeted, ahead of guys like Marlon Humphrey and players like that. And he had 5 interceptions and 11 pass breakups. So, similar to like a Jared Cook on a 1-year deal, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think their money would probably be better spent at this point in going after a slot cornerback, because K'Waun Williams is available. Brian Poole is available. There's some good slot cornerbacks that they could target. And then you can have Chris Harris play outside. I know it's not ideal, but at least it's something. There's some good safeties still out there like Jaquiski Tart. So they have options, and they probably will do something. They have to. Like, you can't head into the draft needing 4 defensive backs, and you also need offensive line, and you probably need you do need a tight end. So I do expect them to sign someone this week that plays defensive back, whether that's a safety or a cornerback. The other one that I wanted to mention in terms of a safety is Deshaun Gibson, who has scheme familiarity, and he had kind of a career renaissance last year with Chicago, and they still run a Vic Fangio kind of defense. And so I think that could make some sense as well.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of decent depth pieces they can kind of sign for the secondary. Like, I don't think it's the season is over because we didn't get Troy Hill, like some people on Twitter think. But I think they should have shot their shot on some of these corners, whether that's a Troy Hill. I also wouldn't have minded Anthony Harris for the secondary.
Right.
It's kind of that free safety presence, just so there's a little bit less pressure on Nasir. But, it is what it is, and you just kind of move on to the next free agents that are available. There's not a lot on there, but there's guys who can at least play pretty decent depth roles. I don't know, Adoree Jackson's going to New York. I don't know if there's really a guy who can be your CB2 like from the jump anymore, because Kyle Fuller is gone and some of the other guys are gone. But I think you're mainly looking for depth, and then hopefully in the draft you kind of take your quarterback of the future.
Either way, just be patient, guys. We had no idea who Cook Aboushi was until 24 hours ago. And now it might be our second highest viewed video on YouTube because you guys are so hyped about it. So like, it's okay. We can relax.
I've been like trying to talk to people. Like, I know that the Chargers could have been doing more. Like, I get it. They had close to $50 million in cap space. I understand a little frustration, but at this time last year, we were looking at Brian Bulaga and Brian Bulaga only. And then they signed Chris Harris and Linval Joseph on Monday and Nick Vigil. And at least at the time, those were all good signings, And so they've gotten 3 legitimate starters on the offensive line. They replaced Hunter Henry with a stopgap option, re-signed Michael Davis. So it's not like they're doing nothing. It's not like Tom Telesco is sitting on his hands saying, oh, look, I still have $50 million in cap space. What should I do with it? Like, they have players. They're not doing an Urban Meyer where they still have a ton of cap space and no one wants to play there. So I understand a little bit of frustration, but pump the brakes. The sky is not falling. They'll be okay. And, if the worst case scenario happens, then they still have the draft. So if they suck at the draft, then you can freak out. But for now, just take a deep breath, relax, positive vibes. It's still only the second week of free agency. and they can still go out and get some good starters.
Speaking of Urban Meyer, I mean, this guy talking about, oh, I want to jump to the NFL. I don't like how NFL free agency works. I like college better. Go back to college then, you fucking fart.
Oh, man. Urban has changed a lot since he left Utah. He should have stayed at Utah. But yeah, so in terms of the draft, right? Like let's get back to that conversation because I think it is necessary. You know, the Broncos don't need a corner, and a lot of people in Denver seem to think that they're either going to target a quarterback, you know, if one falls and kind of maybe play the waiting game there, or potentially trade back if they don't, you know, get a shot on their guy. Again, Adam Schefter said this on one of the free agency shows that ESPN did. He thinks that there's going to be 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 5. It's totally possible. If Adam Schefter says it, there's probably something to it. But I think the Broncos, you know, could take an offensive lineman. They could take Rashawn Slater because they need a right tackle. They probably need a left guard. And so they could realistically target Rashawn Slater. The other thing I will say, the San Francisco 49ers were pegged as a Rashawn Slater landing spot, and they lost Richard Sherman. They lost K'Wan Williams. So they need cornerback help too. So I'm not like holding my breath that Caleb Farley or Patrick Surtain are going to be available there. Again, if JC Horn is my cornerback number 1, he is my CB1, just so everybody is clear there. And I would be thrilled if that's the pick. But, you know, then you're playing the waiting game with offensive tackle. And I just don't know, like, the value for me is offensive line or edge in the first round. And then you can figure out cornerback later. So I know we all want a cornerback right now at 13, but again, you know, just take a step back because the offensive line still needs help. You know, this is a really good, solid start. They don't have any depth, man. They don't have a left tackle. So, you know, pump the brakes on the cornerback at 13 talk. I still think it needs to be an offensive lineman for now.
Yeah. The Denver thing is interesting because Albright, who covers the team, he was kind of saying that even before they got Kyle Fuller that they weren't in on a cornerback.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much that changes things. And also you can make the argument that if they did want to take a cornerback, Kyle Fuller's on a 1-year deal. And if he has a really good year, he's going to cash in probably somewhere else next year because they just signed Justin Simmons to a 4-year, $60 million extension. So there's definitely the possibility of that. The Giants, I think, probably don't take a wide receiver anymore because they did just go get Kenny Golladay.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know about that either because Gettleman, he's an enigma. And so it wouldn't shock me if he decides to take Jalen Waddle. It wouldn't shock me if he decided to take Rashawn Slater. I don't know how this really has affected who's going to be available at 13 other than, you know, like we said, the quarterback talk has super heated up, and now it's, you know, not only Schefter who said the, you know, 4 quarterbacks in the top 5, but Benjamin Albright put it out an interesting, if I had to guess today on Twitter, that had Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, and Justin Fields all in the top 5, which is just insane. I don't think we've ever really seen that before in a draft.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much has changed for the Chargers. I just think they'll have their, you know, pick of quarterbacks and, you know, tackles and guards at 13. That's going to be who's there. I don't think Slater's going to be there, but you're going to have your ABT, your Darasaw, and you're going to have probably, depending on how it turns out, your choice of at least Surtain and Horn, maybe Farley if you get a little bit lucky. So I think they'll still have their choices of who's there.
The only one thing to consider, which you've kind of brought up, is that trade back into the first round. And I just don't know who's going to be available for them, because even if they gave up both 3rd round picks based on the draft value chart, they can only get to 24, which is where Pittsburgh is picking. Right. And Darasaw's probably gone. Elijah Vera-Tucker's probably gone. It would probably mean Slater and Sewell are gone. It's like, who are you really moving up for? Not if you give up both thirds, which is a terrible decision. If you give up, you know, if you need a quarterback, you can jump back in like that, sure, but they don't. So there's no reason to give up 2 3rd round picks. You know, otherwise they're moving to 29 if they give up their first 3rd round pick, or 30. So it's either Green Bay or Buffalo. And like, I don't know, like why would you like you're trading up to get Radunes and giving up a premier pick? Like,
Yeah.
I just don't know if I buy into that. So I mean, a lot of fans are talking about trading up like last year, and sure they did, but people forget that they moved up from 6. They didn't move up from, or not 6, but 37 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Not moving
37.
up from 47, which is a lot more difficult. So I still think just based on the draft, you gotta go offensive lineman. And if you want to wait until round 2 to trade up a little bit and give up, I don't know, your extra 6th, a 5th, whatever, and get that corner that you really like who's really close, that's fine. Telesco's done it 3 times with linebackers. So I could see something more like that. But the idea of trading back into the first to get a tackle, I just don't think is super realistic based on their needs. So I still think it doesn't change what the Chargers need to do. Sure, another Farley might be there, but I still think you got to go left tackle.
Yeah, I think that you could probably trade into the second or trade up in the second, right?
Yeah.
With that third round pick and the extra one they have. If you really want to do that, like say, let's say they go offensive tackle in the first round and you're getting worried about whether Asante Samuel is going to be there, then you can jump 5-6 picks and, make sure that you get him. Like, I think that's the most realistic kind of situation that they can do with their third round picks. But no team is going to trade, their first round pick for your third, right? When they traded up for New England last year, they knew they were giving up their third and their second, right? That's the price of trading up into the first round.
Yeah.
And especially in this draft, I think with the sheer amount of offensive skill players that are available for teams to have, I honestly think the cost of trading up might be a little bit higher than it was last year, especially when you consider that we might have 4 or 5 quarterbacks go in the top 10. And then, all these other players are just going to be available with the next 20, 25 picks. So I keep saying it. We'll see what happens. But I just think, I don't think you can trade up back into the first round like you did last year for Kenneth Murray. I think the only way that they trade up is probably the second or day 3. Can they trade up, into the 4th or 5th round with the extra picks they have? It'll be interesting to see, but I just don't see how they don't take cornerback or offensive tackle at 13. If I had to say my gut feeling right now, and I know this is not going to make some people happy, I would guess that Telesco goes corner in round 1, be that Horns or Tan or Farley if he is there.
Yeah, well, it's going to depend on how they view the board, right? And so, I know that Tom Telesco is probably looking at this offensive tackle class and going, okay, I could realistically get a legitimate starter in the second round. This is a scenario that they're probably talking about, right? Does he feel the same way about the cornerback class? I think he should. But the general consensus, outside of my opinion, is that the cornerback class has a big 3, a couple other players who could be legitimate starters, whether that's Greg Newsome or Eric Stokes or Asante Samuel Jr. There are some good options there. But what if they're all gone, right? The chances of getting an offensive tackle, like a legitimate day 1 starter in the second round, to me are slim. And to get a starting corner in the second round are probably higher. But does Tom Telesco think that way? I don't think he's going to, honestly. We have no reason to think that he's going to take an offensive lineman. We have no reason to be confident that they are going to take Christian Darasaw or Elijah Vera Tucker or Tevin Jenkins, who I think should be in that conversation. We just don't. And so I think if JC Horn is on the board there, and he probably will be, I don't know if he's going to have, the gall to say, you know what, I need an offensive tackle and I'm going to pass on the corner, especially if Caleb Farley there. I think if Caleb Farley is on the board at 13, it's going to happen. So I don't know, man. I would love to say with 100% confidence, it's going to be an offensive tackle. It should. That's the conversation, right? It should be an offensive tackle. I just don't think it's going to be an offensive tackle at this point, barring,
Oh, wow. So you really...
Yeah, I just, the way that Tom Telesco thinks, I don't think it's going to be an offensive tackle, barring, a Dory Jackson out of nowhere signing with the Chargers. I just think they need a true cornerback 1. I know everybody's kind of high on Michael Davis right now. I don't think Michael Davis is truly a cornerback 1. I think he's going to be for the Chargers, but I think they need help. And I think JC Horn, Caleb Farley, Patrick Surtain could all be that for the Chargers.
Ooh, this got interesting. Okay.
Which sucks.
right.
I hate having this conversation
Yeah.
because it 100% should be an offensive tackle, but
Yeah.
I'm just not super confident that it's going to be.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's just you can't predict Telesco, and
that is also true.
Yeah, like that's been the thing for me this whole time. Like, you know, I can do a mock draft where I'm like, you know, I think it's going to be this tackle or this player at 13. Last year was easier because you really knew that at 6, you know, you knew who the 5 guys off the board were going to be. It was going to be Burrow, then Chase Young, then Okuda, then Andrew Thomas, then Tua. And then you knew that Herbert and the other guys were going to be there, and Telesco was going to take whoever he thought was the best out of that group, or, you know, the quarterback based on the need. This year is just hard because so much has to play out in front of them at 13 that it's just hard to predict, A, who's going to be there, and B, you know, what does Telesco think, right? You know, we talked about, you know, people kept mentioning like Derwin James, right? Oh, well, don't say Kyle Pitts can't fall to the Chargers because Derwin James did. You know, I don't agree with that because I think you know, Kyle Pitts is going to go in the first 5 or 6 picks, but there is something to like, oh, if this player, you know, say Rashawn Slater, we didn't think he would be available at 13, but now he is, you know, the pick isn't right. There could be something like that. Or if you don't think Surtain is going to be available, if you don't think Farley is going to be available, does that change the calculus, right? It just depends on how Telesco views these prospects. But yeah, it's harder to predict it this year or like do a real mock draft on like where Telesco is. And I don't even think the free agents fix, or tell us where the Chargers are going to go in free agency. I don't think because they got offensive line help, they're not going to go tackle. I don't think because they got, you know, tight end help, obviously they're, you know, still going to go tight end, even though they signed Jared Cook, right? I don't think any of the free agency, you know, buzz or news has really given us any indication of where the Chargers are leading with the 13th pick or really later in the draft too.
But we'll find out. Whatever happens at 13, I'll be patient because I assume these NFL GMs and the people that are actually being paid for this know what the draft is thinking, or what the league is thinking. So if they take a corner and we're sitting there and going, that's so stupid. My mock draft I did in April said that there weren't going to be any other corners there or whatever. Like, and then it ends up being, and they have their pick of Tevin Jenkins, Badoons, Dickerson, all these guys are there in the second round. Like, you know, what do we know? So I'll be patient, but if they don't announce a tackle at 13 for like the 50th year in a row, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to fucking lose it on the live broadcast.
Yeah.
And live podcast is going to be an interesting show.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is like they have 2 positions of like the most glaring need that they have neglected for ever since Tom Telesco, because they've like the only outside cornerback, everything's going to bring up Desmond King. The only outside cornerback that they've picked is Craig Mager, and they haven't picked a first round offensive lineman since freaking DJ Fluker. They haven't picked a second round offensive lineman since Forrest Lapp, and that's the only one. So like their 2 biggest needs are cornerback and offensive line, and Telesco has barely put any emphasis on them in the draft. And so he is unpredictable. Like that's Tom Telesco's game. We will not know anything about that. And like that's another thing about free agency. They could have been in on any number of guys. We would never know, right? Like we didn't know that they were in on Kyle Rudolph until after Kyle Rudolph signed with the Giants. So we don't know. Maybe they were in on a bunch of other players and we just don't know about it. But in terms of the draft, like it's going to be so interesting to see which position gets the shaft, because, you know, if you talk about the offensive line play, like there's a lot of legitimate offensive tackles that should be first round picks, but does that push them down the board? Do people look at cornerbacks and say, you know what, like I need a cornerback and I know that I can get another offensive tackle in the second round. Do I take Asante Samuel at 20? Do I take JC Horn at 14? Do I take Greg Newsome at 27? And does that push all the offensive tackles down the board, or vice versa? You know, does Greg Newsome fall all the way to 47 because there's just this insane run of offensive tackles? And then you have the wide receiver class, which like Rashad Bateman in a different year is probably a legitimate wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. And this year it's just like, well, nobody's really talking about him because there's all these other players.
Yeah.
So one of these positions is going to get the shaft and one of them is going to fall, way further than they should. And there's going to be 4 quarterbacks in the top 4 or 5, and probably 5 quarterbacks in the top 10. So one position is going to fall. It's just going to be, depending on that day, which position group falls.
Yeah, it's just, we're here sitting in the second week of free agency, and I actually think this week, depending on who they sign, it could be a big deal too, right? If you at least find like a serviceable corner, I'll pull it up and see who I can find later in the show. But I think as long as you get some depth in the second week, and they did sign Chris Harris and Linval Joseph last week, that can change your perception, right? If they go out, AJ Bouye is a free agent, and we know he has kind of a connection to Ronaldo Hill. So, if you go get him, does that slightly decrease the need for a cornerback? Probably, right? I don't know if any of these other quarterbacks fit, because it's a bunch of Casey Hayward and Richard Sherman and Josh Norman. But if you do go kind of get like a high-end, maybe young corner, maybe Mackenzie Alexander from Cincinnati, who I like a lot, or Brian Poole. There's a lot of guys they can go out and get still to boost the depth of the team at any number of positions. Offensive line, offensive tackles have been moving incredibly slowly throughout this free agent process. I mean, really, it was just, I don't know, it was Trent and then Riley Rife, and we haven't heard anything really since about any tackles. So, a Villanueva or someone else is still out there, kind of just weirdly. So depends what they do in the second week of free agency. I do expect Telefsko to make some moves. I don't know if it's going to be the big moves like a Dory Jackson and some of these moves that the fans want them to make, but I do still think Telefsko in his second week form will be a little bit more active.
I wonder if the free agency period is telling us something about how the league views this draft, because they're definitely not taking a bunch of receivers. No one's signing these guys except the stupid Giants. Signing, I mean, not Golladay is a bad player, but Jesus Christ, guys. And then
such a bad contract.
Awful. And then they're not signing tackles. Like you said, the wide receiver market is slow, and the left tackle, or the tackle market in general, is pretty slow. And maybe they think there's going to be everyone's going after tackles and receivers this draft, and maybe it's the corner group that falls. I don't know. I'll be curious. I wish I could go back in time, see what happens, and then come back, because it's very interesting. This offseason is unlike any other.
Time heist, man. Let's do it.
Okay.
We're 3 very highly educated individuals. Let's make it happen.
Okay.
No, like they have to sign more people. Like they have too many roster holes to just sit on this cap and carry over whatever it is, $18 million, depending on who you ask, to next season, and just hold that for next season. Like they have to sign more players, and they will. I mentioned a couple players. I think Deshaun Gibson would be interesting. Malcolm Butler would be interesting for me. A lot of fans have talked about Jadeveon Clowney, or potentially bringing back Melvin Ingram. Where do you guys stand on a couple players that you think would make sense for this second week of free agency? Alex, we'll start with you.
I think there's a lot of guys. You do Chase Daniel, who I like a lot if you want him as a backup quarterback. I know the Easton Stick truthers are going to be in the comments coming at me. But I wouldn't mind him to boost the depth. It seems like Melvin Ingram is out the door, so that kind of creates a need. Someone that hasn't been talked about a lot, but I think would be an interesting signing, given Tom Telefsko's history with the Colts. I forget who pointed this out to me on Twitter, but T.Y. Hilton is kind of available. You could probably get him at a really cheap value because he's been hurt over the last couple of years. I don't think he would cost a lot. That would kind of be an interesting signing just based on the previous Telefsko connections. Jadeveon Clowney is, I know, a guy that a lot of Chargers fans have talked about, especially because Melvin Ingram looks like he's going to be banging the drum instead of Bolt Ganger Don't Bang. So, I think that if you get Jadeveon Clowney, at the very least, he's a good run stopper, someone to put opposite Bosa in a more permanent role. But that kind of does depend on his health, because he also, like Ingram, I believe, did have some knee issues. And then it's kind of really depth after that. I don't think there's a ton of starting caliber guys, but there are guys that you can just add to the fold. Like Steven talked about Cordero Patterson on Twitter, And that goes all the way back to Hutchinson Community College with Brandon Staley.
Oh, yeah.
So that would be a fun signing from the standpoint of special teams, from the standpoint of just getting another receiver that you can play for, I don't think he's going to be cheap, but, you can at least, probably, I don't know. I don't want to make a guess on his contract. It's probably going to be maybe a little of the Chargers price range, but maybe they feel a need to go a little bit over. And yeah, at that point, again, it's just depth guys. Bashad Breeland is available on the market. But yeah, there aren't a ton of free agents remaining that interest me, but I will be curious mostly to see the Villanueva thing and if they're going to be in play for him because they've already been in play with Filer, or are they just kind of going to leave the offensive line to the draft at this point? But we'll see. There's certainly still some interesting guys that I would like to see them sign. I don't know how much action they really have left, though.
The whole Cordarrelle Patterson being available thing really irritates me because like I understand that they have some guys on their roster that can return, and yes, sure, they did draft Joe Reed to do that, and Nasir Adderley did show a few good things. If there were, I don't know, a running back, a receiver, an offensive lineman who was the top two in NFL history at something, pressures allowed per game, or I don't know. Point is, Cordarrelle Patterson is second in NFL history with yards per return. Your return game isn't very good, Telesco. You have all the connections to your coaching staff. He only was 2 years, $10 million with the Bears. It's going to be less than that this season, whatever that is. 1 year, 4, whatever. I don't know. I don't understand why. If the deal gets done, the deal gets done. It's not like someone else has signed him and it's over for the Chargers. They could still pick him up. I'm just surprised that it hasn't gotten done yet. And I know Chargers fans will point to Nasir Adderley. He's returned 11 kicks. And even with that small sample size, which could boost your average, and I think it did. If he returned 30 kicks, I'm sure it would be lower. Even with just 11 kicks and a boosted average, still didn't beat out Cordarrelle Patterson, what he's done in his career and what he did last year. I'm just surprised that this move hasn't been done yet because, I want to give Justin Herbert the ball to 29 every single drive. I know that's not how it works. But like, you start at the 22, start at the 29. Like, just I know you have to block. Sure, there's more things to special teams than just one guy running fast. It's not, running in the grass with your friends and playing football. It doesn't work like that. But it just seems like such a slam dunk, easy move, low cost. The ties are there. He was great last year. He's been good his entire career. You have the need, and maybe Adderley's playing a full-time role on defense, kind of like he did last year. And you don't really want to have. It's not like Adderley was their number one choice, I don't think, going into last season. They had other options that they wanted to figure out. So I hope this deal gets done because I think it just makes a ton of sense. Telesco has self-admitted he didn't have enough guys on special teams. Granted, I think he was talking more about guys to prevent returners from returning, but I don't know. That's the one I'm keeping my eye on because otherwise I'm just kind of like, whatever. Just let me know when you sign someone.
No, I think you're right to be a little upset about that because, he is a fantastic returner and, he's evolved into more of that. He took on a bigger role with the Bears as a running back, as a receiver. And, that's what Joe Reed could be, right? But that's what, Cordarrelle Patterson is right now. And so I think that would be a really good signing. I think that would make a lot of sense. A lot of people have talked about edge in terms of it being a need. And I think someone that really could still be an effective edge rusher for a team as a second pass rusher, third pass rusher is Olivier Vernon. A lot of people have talked about Jadeveon Clowney and Carlos Dunlap and Melvin Ingram, but Olivier Vernon was more productive and more efficient than all of those guys. He had 51 pressures and 9 sacks last year, and his pass rush productivity rate on Pro Football Focus was significantly higher than any of those players. So I think Olivier Vernon is somebody that I would be interested in. I don't think that there's any connections that I know of. But at least on paper, I think that would make a lot of sense. Frankly, I was surprised that Jeremiah Atauchu did not get a call. I mean, he could have, right? But I'm surprised that Jeremiah Atauchu didn't sign with the Chargers, honestly. I thought that would be a depth signing that Brandon Staley would be in favor of. And again, maybe he was and we just don't know it. But he signed today with, who did he sign with? I can't even remember right now.
Chicago.
That's right. So I think that would make some sense. Ryan Kerrigan's out there. I'm not too interested in that. Everson Griffin. I think signing a free agency pass rusher would make sense is what I'm trying to say, because then that kind of eliminates the need early, and you can kind of focus on other things, offensive line and the secondary. So I think, something to keep an eye on this week is if they make a move for an edge rusher.
Yeah, the edge rusher will be interesting. One of the guys that I really like who can play outside linebacker and he can also play linebacker. I like KJ Wright. I said this kind of going into free agency. He's still out there. I don't know if he's going to re-sign with Seattle or what's the deal there. He seems to be in this second wave of free agency with everybody else. But if you could get him on like a, I don't know, 1 year, $7 million deal, 2 years, 14, I really wouldn't hate it. I still think he's pretty productive and can still get after the quarterback, or, they do need still depth at just not even just pass rusher, just linebacker. And KJ Wright might be kind of solving two problems in one a little bit.
Yeah, that would be a good signing as well. So I think in terms of backup quarterback, they have some options now. Obviously, they have Chase Daniel, like Alex talked about. They could go Colt McCoy, who was with Shane Day in Washington, obviously familiar with that kind of scheme. And they could go with Matt Barkley. I think Matt Barkley would be a fine backup as well. Played some good football for the Bills in spot duty over the last couple of years. So they have some options there. In terms of the secondary, a lot of people keep asking about Richard Sherman. If they wanted a zone cornerback, they could have just kept Casey Hayward. So I don't really think that's going to happen. I know that a lot of people really liked his interview with Brandon Staley on their podcast. I just don't think it's a fit, honestly. So if it's a cornerback, I'm keeping my eye on Malcolm Butler, AJ Bouye, that kind of range. As much as I'm going to hate it, I wouldn't be surprised if they sign Kareem Jackson. It's just not really somebody that I'm interested. I think he's a really dirty player, but he's got connections to the Denver coaching staff, obviously, and he would definitely fill a need. Would allow Derwin James to, really just move wherever Brandon Staley wanted him to, and you can put Kareem Jackson and Nasir Adderley in the back. Like I said, to Sean Gibson as well. So I think really this week, my eyes are on the secondary market and the pass rusher market.
I guess I'll ask, we'll finish on this. I remember Tyler tweeted a week ago, it was like, if the Chargers don't sign any Brandon Staley connections, any Rams, I'd be shocked. What do we make of them not signing any Rams or not signing any guys really that have had a strong connection to Staley?
Well, I think the connection is not as strong as we might have thought.
Right.
Certainly there's familiarity. I don't know how strong the connection could be in 1 year. I'm still surprised though that our strongest connection has been our current, not assistant offensive line coach and Brian Bulaga. That's such an for Staley to have none of those three guys, and then so far, I mean, I guess they're in on Fuller, so maybe they are trying to explore these connections a little bit, but I'm definitely surprised so far that they haven't really capitalized on that connection so far. So I guess we'll see.
Well, I felt like the biggest connection that they could have drawn to was Leonard Floyd.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was no way the Chargers were touching that kind of contract. What was it for 64? I think it was.
Yeah.
Just outrageous for a player who I like, but they're
Sure.
paying him more than so many players. He got more money than Carl Lawson. He got more money than Shaq Barrett. So that one was surprising. I just kind of figured, that relationship with John Johnson would really, carry more weight.
Yeah.
And again, we don't know if he did have an offer from the Chargers. We don't know if that made sense for what they were thinking, but I'm surprised that it wasn't one of those two. That being said, there's still some other connections out there. Obviously, like I said, Kareem Jackson, they could still bring in theoretically like an Austin Blythe. I guess that would count as a Brandon Staley connection. He's an offensive lineman though, but it is really surprising that not a single Brandon Staley one is a Charger. It's honestly it's shocking.
Has he ever? This is gonna be. I don't know this personally. Has any of his guys that he's coached, have they started with him, or have they been there and then he's gone to them? Because he hopped from Chicago, hopped to Denver, hopped to the Rams? Was he ever someone that was when he joined? Those guys were drafted that same year or brought in that same year? Or has it always just been him being the second guy there and the free agent or the corner or whatever gets there first?
John Johnson was drafted way before. So was Troy Hill. I think Leonard Floyd was probably in his second season when Staley got to Chicago, if I'm remembering correctly. Jeremiah Atauchu did go to Denver at the same time as Brandon Staley. That one I do know, but again, he was drafted by the Chargers.
Right.
A lot of people were saying, like the Kyle Fuller thing was surprising. Kyle Fuller knew Vic Fangio for 5 years. He knew Brandon Staley for 2,
Yeah.
I think. So I'm not overly surprised that Kyle Fuller decided to go back with Vic Fangio. And it's always like, why would you go to the student when you can go to the teacher kind of thing.
Right.
But the biggest surprise to me is John Johnson, because Brandon Staley and Johnson talked, so glowingly about each other that I figured that one was like the most likely thing. Turns out I was wrong.
Yeah, we all end up with egg on our face sometimes, and I told you guys that Brandon Staley views Derwin James as the John Johnson role, and I was right. So take a little victory lap on that one.
Can't wait for Nasir Adderley and Jilly Ladai in week 4.
I'm not taking a victory lap on that part.
No, they'll have to address that some way, because my understanding of like what he wants to do with the defense is like he's going to have 2 safeties high, and he's going to have Derwin James like around the line of scrimmage, so he is going to have to add another safety like at some point. Someone is going to have to sit back there. I don't think it's going to be Alohi Gilman. Like, my gosh, like, please do not put Nasir Adderley and Alohi Gilman as the 2 back safeties. That would be just a atrocity. Like, I do not want to see that. So they'll add someone. I think that's kind of why I think Kareem Jackson would make a lot of sense, because I would at least like trust his ability back there, like way more than I would trust Alohi Gilman. But I've got to dig into the safety class. I know Richie Grant is kind of like my favorite right now, the safety out of UCF, but I haven't really looked into many others. Trayvon Morg is a really good player, but like they're going to have to add a safety at some point to take some pressure off of Nasir Adderley and Derwin James, frankly.
Shout out to my guy, Hamza Nasruddin. We're coming for you. 5th round.
There we go. There we go.
Great.
All right, guys. Any other thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
I guess not.
Love those awkward
Not
sounds.
too many thoughts from me. Yeah. Not too many thoughts from me.
Oh,
I have no thoughts. We're going into the second week of free agency. I have no idea what Telesco's going to do.
yeah. So definitely keep an eye on that edge rusher market, the safety market. But thanks for tuning in, guys. This has been fun to be able to wrap this week up and kind of talk about these last couple of weeks. So we will see you guys on Thursday, and we are looking forward to that conversation and hopefully some more signings. Thanks. Have a good week.